Welcome to Childhelp's Dare to Care podcast, where every story of struggle transforms into a beacon of hope. Together, we'll uncover the courage to rise above our challenges and rediscover joy and resilience. Let's dare to care.
Due to the sensitive nature of the content, viewer and listener discretion is advised.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carrie Pena, and we want to welcome you to the Dare to Care Survivor Series podcast. And we are broadcasting today from the Center for Positive Media. I'm here with my co-host, Michael Medoro, who is the Chief of Staff for Childhelp.
Hi.
It's great to be back in the studio with you.
Love being here. Thank you so much.
This is episode 6 of the series. And I want to just, before we introduce our guest, who has a really compelling story to share, I want to talk for a moment about the purpose of this podcast. One of the things that you do at Childhelp is try to bring the stories to light, bring the stories of abuse so it's no longer a hidden subject. But more than that, we want to shine the light on the hope and the healing.
Exactly right. And we've talked about this in earlier series. It's a dark issue. Child abuse and trauma is hard for people to talk about. It's hard for people to accept sometimes in their own lives, but definitely hard to accept when it's close to them, family members, friends, loved ones. And that's what this series is about. It's an opportunity for survivors to come forward, share their journey with others so that others don't feel alone, so that others have a chance to understand the hope and healing journey that they went through, find some of the similarities in there, and know that they too can come to the other side with hope, healing, and opportunity. And
Childhelp is such a powerhouse organization, so you're reaching people nationally and worldwide with this series. What's the feedback you've been getting about shining the light on this subject?
Phenomenal. Really what we are learning and discovering is the lack of understanding that people have about the support services and programs that are available to them, not just to intervene or prevent, but also to treat and heal. And the ability for people to become more aware of those programs and services right there in their communities. And that's what Childhelp offers. Our programs and services are available in every single community across the United States. And the awareness of that and the ability for families and children to receive those programs and services has been the biggest takeaway from this Survivor Series.
And I'm just so moved by all of the guests who have the courage to come in and share their stories, like the gentleman who we're going to introduce you to right now, Tim Broderick. Thank you so much, sir, for being here. We really appreciate you.
You're welcome, Carrie.
So you have a heartbreaking story, but one also that talks about healing. And you're 38 years clean. We'll talk about that and how you got there in a few moments, because I think that you have such wisdom to share. But I wonder if you would first be so kind to share with the audience a little bit about your story and some of the abuse that you suffered at the hands of your father while growing up.
Sure. Thank you so much, Michael, for describing what you guys do. And it is a tough subject because it's something that I didn't want to talk about for a long time. In fact, when your guys' representatives had asked me to do this, although I have talked about what went on when I was a kid, it was kind of tough to think about, okay, I'm going to do this on video and a zillion people are going to see it. And then it was my support group, which I really believe is super important as far as getting in touch with that hope, is that they reminded me it's like somebody is going to be able to hear that they too can get through stuff. And so like what I went through was, as far back as I could remember as a little kid, I lived in a very hostile, violent home. My father it's interesting that today is Veterans Day. It was an era where, because you mentioned I'm 38 years clean, I'm also 65 years old, so it kind of gives you an idea of the era that I grew up in. My father was a World War II and Korea conflict veteran. And there just wasn't the services at that point in time. And I really do believe that he suffered his own demons. And the way those demons manifested in our household was he was real violent. And he was real violent, put my mom in the hospital a whole bunch of different times. He was a raging alcoholic. My mom was a raging codependent and had her issues with prescription drugs. So like I learned a lot of real poor coping skills growing up. Let's put it that way. I didn't know which end was up. I grew up in a family that I was told it's, children should be seen and not heard. It's like, do what we tell you to do, not what we do, which was a good thing because I at that point in time, I can literally remember sitting on the playground at school, looking up at the clouds, thinking, I have no idea what a normal family is, but I know the one that I live in is not a normal family. So anyway, when my dad would go off on my mom, a lot of times I would try to keep my sister out of the way. There's times that I put her in the closet or take her outdoors, things like that, so she just wouldn't have to watch it. And it took me a long time to get in touch with the impact that being in that environment had on me. And honestly, for a long time in early recovery, because the way I coped with life, the way I coped with a lot of that over a period of time was I became a very rebellious youth. I was in a lot of trouble. I turned to drugs and alcohol. And I started using essentially when I was about 10 years old. And by the time I was 14 years old, I used all the time. My father moved away when my mom finally divorced my dad. And he left when I was 12. And he died of the disease of alcoholism when I was 15. And his abuse on her kind of rolled downhill. So I ended up being abused by her as well. There was physical abuse that went around to everybody. Later on in life, for many years, I blamed because my coping skill was, I can remember being, I don't know, roughly 6th grade in school where I discovered on the playground that if somebody was giving me a hard time, if I hurt them physically, got into a fight with them, that they would leave me alone. And that became a normal coping skill for me for a long time. In fact, I was really good at football. I played a lot of football growing up, and that was because I could be violent and not get in trouble. So those were the coping skills that I learned. I don't suggest that because they were very self-sabotaging in the long run and very counterproductive.
I want to talk about when you had the moment where you realized something for you had to change. But before we ask you about that, Michael, I wonder if you could touch on something that Tim just said. And I know that's really near and dear to you and to Childhelp, that he's pointing out that for many years, if children were suffering abuse, they should be seen but not heard. So there was no opportunity to speak up and you didn't know where to get help. You are working very hard to change that.
Exactly right. When Childhelp first started and was founded, that was the very first thing that was discovered. It was then Nancy Reagan who spoke with our founder, Sarah O'Mara and Yvonne Feddersen, and asked them to tackle America's best kept secret. And that was it. It was children are being abused behind closed doors, but they're supposed to be seen and not heard. And so nobody was disclosing the fact that they were abused. And that's improved to some degree, but is not vastly that different today. It's just different ways that children are kept silent, different ways that children are held by intimidation and fear from being able to speak about some of the dangers that they are experiencing. In fact, one of the programs that we started on, you mentioned football. One of the programs that we launched recently was our Courage First helpline. And the reason that we launched this helpline was to be able to give athletes, especially aspiring athletes who are looking for college scholarships or may have professional careers, an opportunity to vocalize what they are experiencing from an abusive situation that may be at the hands of a coach or a league official or another family member, but they're too scared to say anything because they're afraid of what that's going to do to jeopardize their athletic career, right? Mm-hmm. We have still so many situations in which children and families are held silent for fear versus the ability to speak up and say, something is not right, I need help. And our Childhelp National Child Abuse Hotline was designed just for that purpose, to be able to create an anonymous hotline for individuals to call and say, what I'm experiencing or what I am witnessing is dangerous, is unhealthy, is abusive, is traumatic, and I need help. And now allow the reins of a professional counselor to take charge of that situation and intervene and find help and assistance without having the child or the family who may be victimized or traumatized having to navigate those waters all alone. But that is still something that we need to grow awareness and support on because, as you're alluding to, Tim, it is hard, especially when you're in an environment of fear and you're trying to cope and deal with your own trauma and your own stress. How do you ask for that help?
So you guys have provided an opportunity where, say like myself at the age of 10, 11, 12, in 6th grade, 7th grade, I would have been able to pick up the phone and call and speak with somebody that would have been able to intervene.
Exactly. And in today's market,
that's terrific.
Today's market, you've got where back in your day, the medium was only phone.
Right.
Now it's text, chat, capabilities that we've been able to allow for children to be able to use that are much more comfortable mediums for them, right? So back in the day, it's landlines. There was no cell phones. So there was no, I can go into the bathroom or go somewhere else and have a call and hopefully nobody hears it. There's a cord that's connected. I remember back when I was growing up, the cord was connected to the kitchen wall and you had to play. As long as that cord could stretch, it's as much privacy as you're going to be able to get, right? Nowadays, it's different. And we allow for those capabilities so that children can ask for that type of help and seek that type of anonymously. So it's now we've got community resources, professional counselors answering those calls, community resources being able to dispatch whatever the resources are needed for that child or that family in crises.
That's terrific, because that's what has made a huge difference over a period of time. And I wonder sometimes, I don't get real stuck in it, but I do wonder sometimes what it would have been like had I had those resources at a much younger age.
Yes.
Because by the time I hit adolescence and then young adulthood, my rebelliousness and I was out of control. At that point, I had no open-mindedness whatsoever and probably would not have availed myself of any resources anyway.
Yep.
But prior to that, perhaps. And then once I finally did surrender and get clean, I was able to avail myself of resources that are available out there. Yeah. And healing from trauma is an enormous step for people. For it's been the number one thing in my life that has made a significant difference.
Let's talk about that healing journey. The trauma that you suffered was so deep. To unravel that is difficult to think about. You were obviously deep in various addictions, and you explained that you had a lot of hostility. No one can blame you for that. When was the moment, do you remember, where you're like, I've got to change. I've got to take hold of this?
Well, I wouldn't say that it was any one moment. There were several wake-up calls, if you will, along the way. I started having wake-up calls 3-4 years before I actually got clean. And then even after getting clean, so I'm involved in 12-step fellowship. And one thing my sponsor always tells me, and I also have availed myself of a broad group of mentorship in addition to 12-step fellowship in business arenas. I have coaches and mentors and things like that. And so I've availed myself of something that I don't see happening for children. I see it happening a lot more now, but definitely not in the past, is a sense of community. That isolation that essentially isolation breeds abuse. Whereas when people are parts of communities, which is how I changed, is I availed myself of getting in touch with communities. Anyway, Spons tells me it's like this thing happens overnight, or it happens over time, not overnight. So there wasn't any one specific wake-up call. I can tell you that I can remember distinctly, not the time and the place, but I can remember becoming aware of how much of my life I blamed on my parents and how they were. They were violent. They were angry people. That's how they coped with life. And for a long time, I blamed I joke about before I got clean, I was a walking resentment. I had never forgiven anybody in my life, which was true. And the really good news is today I consider myself kind and gentle and loving and caring. And those weren't things that I knew how to be prior to starting the healing work. And I can remember distinctly thinking, it is my choice. Like I get to choose. Like as a kid, I didn't get to choose. I truly was victimized as a child. And it's like, and as an adult, it's very important that I no longer play the victim. And it's very important that I choose. And so I had to let go of those coping skills and quit blaming them, and then develop new coping skills.
You touch on a lot of community in that, and I love that, because that's exactly what this podcast series is designed to build, is a community of survivors, a community of people to understand how do we go through the journey of healing together, because it's a journey. You don't just heal overnight, just like you weren't traumatized immediately overnight, right? It becomes an experience that you have to continue to work your way through, and you're going to have high days and you're going to have low days. And the ability to connect with others that have gone through similar experiences as yourself is exactly what this podcast series is all about. And the programs and services that Childhelp has to offer are designed to provide those prevention, intervention, and treatment strategies to help develop healthy coping mechanisms and healthy ways to advance into a life of success and achievement.
Well, what intrigues me about your organization is that you're providing resources in real time right now for children and not have to deal with somebody like me as far as an adult who has to overcome all of that stuff, where they may not have to go through the things that I went through, which is a real blessing.
And Tim, I wonder if you could talk about, as Michael was touching on community, when you started talking to mentors and sharing the story of good friends or whoever, and you started opening yourself up, how much did that free you?
A lot. I'm giggling because I recall I was a loner for many, many years. I had the mindset of, I don't need your help. I can do it all on my own. And that's a fallacy. None of us can do I don't care how successful anybody is. When you break it down, nobody does it completely on their own. So how much did it free me up? Early on, I had started talking to an individual. I'd actually seen a priest to begin with, because I was part of my upbringing was, in addition to rigid military family, there was I went to parochial school. So I had a lot of serious structure going on. And when I first got clean and started unloading a lot of my past, not just the childhood trauma, but my stuff, the abuse that I had dished out to other people in my life, and the self-sabotage that I had practiced, I actually sought out a priest because I knew that he could not divulge anything that I shared. And he suggested, it's like, okay, I see that you're hanging out with all these other people that are in a recovery community, talk to them about it. And I started doing that. I didn't want to do it. But as I noticed myself starting to do that, here's what happened is there was less and less fear. The fear started to dissipate. And what I got in touch with is that for years I had been afraid to essentially tell the secrets, okay? And what I had found over a period of time by sharing with one person and then a group of people, that he had us all get together once a week. And that's what we did, is we got real. We talked about all the stuff that was currently going on in our life. And we talked about all the stuff that happened when we were kids. And my story, what I found out is, just like during the introduction you mentioned, my story wasn't that much different. It had little nuances of differences, but I found out that there were fellows that there was significant violence that went on in other people's lives as well.
Yeah.
And I wasn't the only person that had ever had to walk through that. And we became support for one another.
It was beautiful because as a journalist, I believe so fundamentally in the power of sharing the story. It frees us and it helps others, which is exactly what you're doing here today. I wonder if you could share a little bit about, what is your life like today?
What is my life like today? I have a great life. I love my life. It's interesting. There are still times where I am triggered from my past. The great news is that I have a lot of tools in my toolbox, if you will, to be able to deal with those. I can quit, which I choose not to do. And that's how it was. That's what I was doing for a long time behind the traumas. Like, I literally was quitting and using the trauma as an excuse. And today, what I do is I take a look at, am I practicing any self-sabotaging behavior? Am I being nasty to other people behind being afraid? Because that's really what it comes down to, is all that trauma made me afraid. And later on in life, I chose to be afraid behind seeing something that looks similar to growing up. And it's not like today, right now, this is not anything like what it was when I grew up. So my life today is, I tell people a lot of times, here's the two things that I have today that I never dreamed possible in my life, is I have calmness and peace of mind that I never dreamed possible. And then the other thing is I have a deep relatedness with a large number of people today that, like I said, before I got clean, I was a loner. I didn't need anybody. I didn't want anybody. And now I cherish those deep, intimate relationships that I have with people.
Tim, you are a beautiful soul. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you pouring your heart out. And I know saying a lot of things that will help other people.
Absolutely. Thank you for being part of our community.
You're welcome.
Thank you for sharing your story. We appreciate you.
And thanks to all of you for watching and listening. You can watch this on YouTube and you can listen on Spotify. I'm Carrie Pena alongside Michael Maduro. Take good care.
Thanks for joining us on Childhelp's Dare to Care podcast. If you found some inspiration from this conversation, please leave a written review on Apple or Spotify. Subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Keep the conversation going with us on our YouTube channel in the comments.